Welcome back to another episode of the House Husband Diaries. As always, I am your host, Carter C., and today is another day in the crazy world of COVID-19, coronavirus 2020. And this has been a totally unexpected situation that I didn't have on my schedule to talk about with all that's going on with politics and the Democratic presidential nomination, or that whole race. And but then I'm just, I was talking about the history of taxation, talking about national debt, was trying to get to government spending, which I will this week. And then this news came out about the coronavirus and us having the lowest, the worst day in the stock market since 1987. And then I came across this piece of information, and this is what I'm going to talk about today. And I just want to throw some ideas out. Like I said, this stuff is so crazy and it's happening so fast that I don't really have a whole lot of time to fully research as much as I would like, because I'm just trying to get these ideas and these thoughts out here, and then have your feedback as well. And so, I'm kind of doing like a brief history of the Fed. And I mean, by brief, I mean like when it started and what it was for. And I'm not going through the whole history of what it's been doing the last 100 years. But when I saw this, I saw something that said the Fed was going to. So the Federal Reserve is also known as the central bank. And basically, what the Federal Reserve does is it centralizes, i.e., central bank, right? It centralizes our monetary policy. So we don't have different kinds of currency all over the United States and different municipalities, cities, counties, whatever. We use the same currency, and then it's centralized. Decisions are made for interest rates, all kinds of stuff. So on the surface, it makes sense, right? I mean, if you're going to have a collection of sort of somewhat semi-independent states that work together for the good of a common country, a common goal, then a central bank on the surface, makes a lot of sense. Let's just make everything sort of the same, and then somebody has to be in charge of it. And it has done I think a fairly good job over the history of our country. But when you start to look at kind of the decisions that we've been making over the last 30 or 40 years, and sort of questionable decisions, and maybe potential greed rather than personal responsibility, starts it starts compounding exponentially. So you make one, maybe this isn't the best decision right now for the long-term viability or health of the country, but it's the best in the short term for, these businesses or this situation. And then, the next year or 5 years later, you make another decision, which, well, we just need to make this decision in the short term because that's better. And then it just starts to, maybe now you only have a year or two, and then you only have 6 months between these decisions. And now you're just kind of pushing that can down the road. And so basically we're at this point where globalization has happened. I'm sure we're not going to go back from globalization. I don't ever think that's going to happen. But I think it's really interesting, and it brings up points that should be discussed on, and I'll do another video on, all that China makes, and how we depend on them. And China has terrible labor laws. And so it's crazy that we as a country, quote unquote, support that, because we have them make all of our stuff for cheaper, but yet we're losing middle class jobs and a strong middle class in America. So anyway, we'll get to it. All of these questions they're deep. They have many levels, and there's no easy answer. There's no just, Obama would fix this, or Trump would fix this, or whatever. And that's across the board. I don't think one president or one sitting Congress is going to get us out of the mess that we find ourselves in. So really what this conversation is just to start, building that community to say, hey, we're thinking about these things, we're talking about these things. What do we need to put in place, this year, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, to try to claw back, to get out of debt, to, get in a financially more secure place, to, to rebuild a strong middle class, to re-engage people in politics. What are those things? And I get that people will say, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. And I'm not saying I'm going to be able to do that. I think it's just interesting to explore those topics. And really, you can't talk about it at work. You can't talk about it at church. If you go to church, you can't talk about all these kinds of things. And so that's the beauty of YouTube and of technology. On one hand is that, I can say whatever I want, put it up there, well, within reason, right? And then we can have hopefully a positive discussion on many topics that we wouldn't normally have in the course of our day-to-day lives. Okay, long intro story. So let's get to what I thought was so interesting yesterday. I'm filming this on Friday, and it'll drop in a couple days. But Thursday, we had the biggest drop in the stock market since 1987, as I said before. And I was texting to a buddy of mine, and I said, yo, the Fed just dropped $500 billion into our financial markets. $500 billion. Normally they do like $100 billion to float, and then they had moved it to 150, and then I saw this article that said $500 billion. Well, last night I saw an article, and I've seen multiple since, that said the Fed made the unprecedented move of dropping $1.5 trillion into the financial systems yesterday. And we still had the lowest or the worst day in, 33 years in the stock market. Almost my entire life. $1.5 trillion. Do you, like, that amount of money is crazy. Because in order to write it, nobody writes 1, 5, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I think that's right. I don't have it written out that way. But that's just too long, and that's like most journalists don't have a clue about numbers, and so, that would be just a spell check nightmare. So they just write $sign 1.5 and then trillion. And so it just looks like, oh, okay, it's like, 1.5 thousand, 1.5 million, 1.5 billion, 1.5 trillion. But you're talking a crazy amount of money. So I saw the 1.5 trillion, and I was like, okay, that article says they're dumping $1.5 trillion into our financial system. How am I going to see that? Right? I don't have some massive amount of stocks, right? Like, I don't care if the stock market plummets and goes to zero, I can then buy some stocks. There are going to be a lot of millionaires and billionaires that are out fortunes because they're like all paper money, right? I'll be just as rich as them tomorrow if the stock market quits. If the stock market doesn't exist tomorrow or today, doesn't bother me a bit. So what? Why would I be okay with the Fed just dumping $1.5 trillion into the financial system to help America? It doesn't help me. It doesn't help you. Or how does it? Right? Let's get to the bottom of it. They're going to say it does. Obviously, the government and the Fed, everybody says, oh, this is for the betterment of all Americans. So let's put this into perspective. $1.5 trillion. There are supposedly, give or take, 330 million Americans. So if you divide $1.5 trillion by 330 million, you know what you get? Of course you don't, because you didn't do the calculations, and if you did, you didn't do them that fast. But maybe you did it while I was talking. Yeah, $4,545.45. 4545 repeating. $4,545.45. That's what you get. The Federal Reserve, dumped $1.5 trillion into our financial systems on Thursday, March 12th to alleviate the stock market dropping. And that is equivalent to, they could have written a $4,500 check to every single American yesterday. Now, you tell me, would you rather have the federal bank, the Federal Reserve, central bank, dump $1.5 trillion into our financial markets for liquidity purposes? Or would you rather have the Federal Reserve write you a personalized check for $4,545? If you could just put a check for 10 grand into the mail to me and my wife, I don't really care about the stock market. I already mentioned that. So I would love to have 10 grand. You know what I mean? I get that it's only 9, but I'm thinking there's probably some, like, we could fudge some numbers and we would just round up. You know what I mean? Come on. Why not up it to 1.6 trillion or something and just give everybody 5 grand? I mean, honestly, where's this money coming from? We don't have the money. We already have a national debt. Our government is working every year in a deficit because we don't bring in as much money in tax revenue or other revenue streams as we spend already. And then you're just going to dump 1.5 million or 1.5 trillion dollars of monopoly money into the financial system. Why don't you just write me a check? Here's what $4,500 does. Okay? So I was thinking about this. So we're going to quarantine people for 2 weeks. We're cutting, I think, different NBA stopped the rest of their season. The PGA Tour is now moved. The Masters, which is a month away, and all these different. The ATP Tour, World Tennis Tour is canceling 6 weeks of tennis tournaments, all this stuff. So I started thinking, okay, well, what does $4,500 do? If you're talking about an economic stimulus package, and this is something that Congress is still working on, right? They can't figure out what the hell to do for Americans, but the Federal Reserve can immediately just make a decision to dump $1.5 trillion into our financial system. Congress doesn't know what the hell's going on. And what I'm telling you is $4,500 per American, right? If we all go on lockdown and we're all in quarantine, let's just say you have per person, right? One single person, $4,500. And that includes children, that includes, older people, that includes everybody. But just for a single person, let's say your rent is $1,000 a month in a single apartment, which I get that in New York City or Boston, it's way more than that, right? And I also get that in smaller towns, it's less than that. It could be $400 to $600 or something like that. But let's just say $1,000, right? $1,000, $4,500 is 3 months of rent and $500 a month for food. You could quarantine, the average American could probably quarantine themselves for 3 months on $4,500. And then if you talk about, married couples or roommates or families of, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, now you're starting to add, well, if everybody gets $1,000 that lives in an apartment or a house together, now you're talking, hey, that's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for rent or mortgages per person. $4,500 per person would go so much further, in my opinion, if we just shut everything down for a little while. Everybody goes into quarantine, and then we could just pay bills for, 3 months, give or take, right? Give or take. I'm not saying it totally, because I know there's some, like my rent in Boston with my wife for this little 600 square foot nothing apartment was $3,000 or something. It was crazy. So I get that in Boston, right in the heart of town, with all that rent, it was just crazy high. So, but you could still quarantine yourself for a month. And then if there were 2 of us that were getting the check that shared it, then you're still talking 2 months of quarantine if we just share rent. I just, I know that some of you think you're economists, and even economists. I've had discussions of why I'm wrong on some of these things, but I also think that a lot of the reasons that we're given and that economists think economists live in what is like a perfect world bubble, and that's not reality. And so when you say, oh well, this works for the economy, that only works in mathematical theory. It doesn't really work in reality. But this is something that actually works in reality. Instead of dumping $1.5 trillion into a financial system, which nobody will see except for banks and CEOs and people that own stocks, you could actually just write a check for $4,500 to every American, deposit it into the bank account. And then when you think about it, think about helping the lower half of Americans, the poorer half of Americans. $4,500 tax free, right? You don't tax it. I mean, if you're making less than $20,000 a year, less than $30,000 a year, that is cold hard cash in somebody's pocket that they could then dump into the economy and spend, and they'll spend it. You know why? Because they need to live. That money will go right back into the economy. I'm telling you. I get trickle down economics, I do, and I believe in it most of the time. But in a situation like this, I'm a bottom up kind of guy, It just seems to make sense. So, what I will say to close up this video, because I know you're going to tell me your thoughts, and I want you to. I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation, which is why I'm doing this video. But what I will say, the last thing I'll say about the Federal Reserve, is I thought this was really interesting when I was doing my quick research for this video. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913, December of 1913. If you watch my history of the income tax in America video, you can go back and check it out. Guess what year the 16th Amendment was ratified? 1913. October of 1913, the U.S. instituted income tax, 1% income tax. 1913. 2 months later, our government says, hey, now that we have an income tax and we have a steady income stream for the government, we need a central bank, because we're going to be charging everybody all this money and taxing all these people. And we should probably, if somebody's going to give us this and somebody's going to give us this and we need a way to centralize that, because who's to say that 6 bushels of corn from Idaho or potatoes from Idaho and, corn from Iowa and pigs from North Carolina or whatever are going to be, how are we going to make that equal? So now we need to centralize it. So I thought that was fascinating that the institution of the income tax in America, for all intents and purposes, there were 2 other times, but you can watch that video, and the institution, the beginning of the Federal Reserve, were within 2 months of each other. I thought that was fascinating. So there's your little tip for the day, your little knowledge. We'll learn something new every day. And then the other thing I'll say is the reason why the Federal Reserve was created was to alleviate financial crises. But right now it appears to only be trying to alleviate the financial crises of the wealthier Americans who own stocks and bonds and all of that jazz. And as far as for me and some of my friends that I've talked to about this, because I kind of shared the numbers and stuff, we're in pretty much agreement that we just rather take like $4,500 and be quarantined to be done with it. So let me know what you think. Thanks again, as always, for watching another episode of the House Husband Diaries. If you like it. If you will, subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of May, my 40th birthday. I know I keep saying it, but I'll do it sometimes at the beginning, sometimes at the end. But I'm having a blast, and these kinds of things are fun. Like I said earlier in the video, it's absolutely not an easy discussion to have. There's no easy answer. I'm just throwing out ideas, and some of it's fun, some of it's serious, but I just hope that I think about things in a different way and maybe just kind of put a different light on some of these crazy times. So thanks again for watching this episode of the House Husband Diaries. Hope you have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow.